Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Trees, a podcast presented by Cedarwood Financial Partners. We have a very special guest today, a friend of mine over the past few years and a true industry expert. So I'm very excited to welcome on Kol Birke. He is the managing principal of community and technology engagement at Commonwealth Financial Network. He has been at Commonwealth since 1999 after spending nearly 20 years helping build out Commonwealth's industry-leading advisor technology suite. He is now working to strengthen the connection between those in their community of advisors and their home office team, as well as to connect them to their most valuable tools and resources. In addition, he's passionate about financial behavior with a hunger for making financial planning easier and more effective by helping advisors leverage the latest behavioral insights and techniques. Kol has been honored in Investment Advisor Magazine's IA25, a list of the most influential people in the industry, for his work at the intersection of technology and financial psychology. His writing has been featured in Investment News, the Journal of Financial Planning, and Think Advisor, and he has spoken at numerous industry conferences, notably as keynote of the Financial Planning Association's retreat. We are very lucky to have you, Kol. Thanks for being on. I'm excited to catch up and get some of your insights here.
Well, thank you, Alex. I'm humbled to be here with a firm that I respect as much as I do Cedarwood.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll say, I think you used the word there that in my mind, it encompasses you quite well, and that's humble. For anyone listening, don't let it be lost that Kol is an expert and very, very intelligent. One of the greatest resources I've had since being a part of Commonwealth. And so I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on everything you're doing, technology. Obviously, we're going through a crazy time in your space at Commonwealth as well. But why don't we start with what you do on a daily basis, kind of your work at Commonwealth, and just go from there.
Yeah, so if I might make this a slightly longer story, my first project at Commonwealth 25 years ago was to create an easier way for advisors to open accounts for their clients. And knowing absolutely nothing about technology, about the industry, or about how humans work, I went about making what I thought was an intuitive system, but it required every last piece of information. And social security numbers if they were the beneficiary on the account. And of course, you don't always have that. And so what I learned really fast is the most important thing about the technology is it works the way that we work, that it is in service of us, not us in service of the technology. I know with having a 10-year-old kid who always wants to be on the iPad, that I just want to make the technology that is in the background, that is helping us live our best lives rather than us being enslaved to the tech. So that's sort of my philosophy. And day to day, I just help shepherd that at Commonwealth so that our technology works as intuitively as possible.
Okay. So in your mind, did you stumble into technology a little bit, or has it always been a passion?
So, yes, I absolutely stumbled into this. My passion has always been, and I only sort of recognize this in the rearview mirror, has been helping make complicated things simple. So that people can live their best lives. And technology is just a really fascinating, wonderful way to live that out.
Yeah, that's something we have in common. I love taking complicated situations and making them simple. And I'd say that's probably where Cedarwood was born in a lot of ways. But your ability to take those concepts and use technology, I think, has been inspiring to me in that you hear the term cutting edge a lot. And what that means is probably lost in today's world to some degree, right? But I truly see you pushing that barrier. And I think it's helped me to realize, okay, as an intermediary or whatever you want to call us, we need to be pushing that barrier as well and continuously exploring what's out there and what's new.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic of like, how much do we push the envelope versus how much do we enjoy what we already have? And I think it's really easy to get caught up in a trap, whether it's with technology, which is a very easy place to do it, to say, what's the newest, shiniest thing that I could be using versus going the other direction and saying, are there problems I have that I want to solve? And if not, maybe I leave things well enough alone. But if you were heading towards, what is the newest, shiniest thing in the industry, which I think will be the most dominant force, it's a little trite for me to say it, but it's AI, it's artificial intelligence. And it is a buzzword for a reason. I think it was Bill Gates that said, in the short run, any new technology is overhyped. It doesn't do as much as we hope it's going to do in the short run. But in the long run, we actually underestimate how much change it will bring. And I think AI will be a great example of that, where in today's world, it does some pretty cool things, but you need to watch out for it messing up. And so there are ways in which it's not all that helpful because you still have to babysit it. I've heard this notion that AI is like the world's best intern, right? That no matter how good the intern is, you still got to check up on their work. And so it's sort of like that. But I do think in the longer run, AI will bring us untold benefits of, to me, the place where it's most magical is where it actually gives us more agency, more control. We think of AI as something that could take control away from us, but I actually think it allows us to outsource the decisions that our wisest self makes to the technology so that we can be in control.
Interesting perspective. So, in your mind, do you see AI taking a lot of jobs away at some point, or do you think this just increases efficiencies and creates different jobs, as we've seen with a lot of other technology throughout time?
$1 million question. So I do see it eliminating a lot of jobs. I don't see it eliminating the role of the financial advisor, which is a trusted guide role. I do think, the line that I have been thinking about is that it's more RoboCop, where it's a human and all of the morals and values and emotions that human has as the financial advisor, but that's amended or strengthened by the technology. And so I do think that financial advisors, let's say 5 or 10 years from now, who aren't leveraging AI will be at a big disadvantage to those that are. But you'll still want a human in the seat that you're talking with and that's making judgment calls on your behalf. But in terms of job creation and job elimination, as you mentioned, I never want to bet against the ingenuity of humanity. And so I think there will be, again, untold new jobs and industries that humans create in the lack of the jobs that we no longer need to be doing. And I think many of those jobs that we no longer need to be doing are jobs that many of us wouldn't want to be doing anyway. So, hopefully the future will be even brighter than the past.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll say from my perspective, my limited experience with AI, most of it is around comfort is where our challenges are going to be. From the technology that I have experienced that I think, oh, I like this, or I see some opportunity potentially here. It's okay, who's going to have a hard time implementing this? And it's mostly, well, they're just going to feel uncomfortable with it at first. And like you said, it doesn't completely eliminate the work. You have to double check it, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for efficiencies to increase, for people to get time back in their day. And candidly, they may not need their staff member to do some of those jobs, and they can do something else that brings value to their clients.
I think that's a great call. There's an example that exists today in many industries, including ours, which is a meeting summary tool, right? That listens in on the meeting and uses AI to not just summarize what were the key points in this conversation, but what were the action items, the takeaways. Because oftentimes you end up talking with somebody for an hour, and at the end of it, you're like, well, what did we decide today? What do we need to do? And you have to look through all your notes. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could stay completely focused in the situation, completely present, right? Bring all of your humanity, not being distracted by taking so many notes and letting the AI do the thing that the AI does best of taking those notes and highlighting those to-dos. So I think you're right. I think that there are not just work savings, but actually quality enhancement that will come from this.
That's such a good call out. And actually, the technology you're speaking of there is one that I have on my list of interests. And I think when you especially consider being in the advisor's seat and you're focused on having a conversation, you're trying to make eye contact, you're conscious of your body language, you're trying to make sure that the words you say make sense, that it's clear to your clients, and you're trying to take notes and not come across as rude that, hey, I'm writing something, but I'm trying to listen at the same time. You're juggling a lot of balls there. And I think that piece of technology could really enhance the ability to connect with clients, as well as getting those action items and everything else down the road pinned down easier. It's from my side, it's, when you finish, if you have 4 or 5 appointments in a day, you're exhausted because you're thinking of every aspect and you're trying to be a perfect, in some ways, a performer, right? And so if you don't have to think about one thing, it gives you a little bit of energy back.
And on top of that, I think for all the advisors that I've spoken with, certainly those folks in your firm at Cedarwood, the work of connecting a client's values to their goals and financial plan and outcome is soulful work.
Mm.
And for me, and I think for all of you, that side of the job brings energy, right? Connecting soul to soul with a client brings energy. And that it's the sort of drudgery or minutia or, did I miss this one note that I was really crucial to not miss? Being able to put that onto either a paraplanner, some other individual, or even better yet, onto a technology that at some point doesn't make mistakes. That frees you up to have those 4 meetings or 5 meetings be energizing rather than depleting.
Yeah, it's beautifully put. I couldn't agree more. My partner Todd Vincent always says it's like every client's like painting a picture. And I know he is an example. The concerns of the action items definitely weigh on him. And so being able to free that up and just paint that picture is going to be something I think he'll enjoy once he feels comfortable with the technology that's available. For you, is there any other AI technology that you've seen that's exciting that you think could bring some value to your advisors over the next few years?
Yeah, so one of the things I think is important to distinguish is general AI, like for folks that have used ChatGPT or any of those other tools, those are general AIs. And the idea behind them is that they can do anything. But by virtue of that, they can mess up more regularly than purpose built. The other category is very purpose built AI. And that's where I think we are going to see a revolution in this industry. And so take as an example, estate planning, right? Estate attorneys meticulously learn the law and then draft these documents. And many of these documents are based on templates they've created. And so they're trying to shoehorn one client into a template that may not perfectly fit. And most good estate attorneys, don't just shoehorn, they customize. But to be able to, take 100 clients worth of estate plans or 1,000 clients worth of estate plans and pass them through an AI that doesn't just understand what ChatGPT understands, but goes further and understands estate law in every single state and how it's changed year to year to year. And to be able to say, all right, Cole, you drafted your will 2 years ago. That's pretty fresh. Normally we wouldn't review it, but there was this major estate law change in your state and it changed this one piece of that impacts your will because I, as the AI, have looked through your will and you happen to be in the 1% that's impacted. To be able to have
Mm.
that level of proactive precision, this is a weird analogy, but I heard this idea that as nanotechnology gets better, we'll be able to put sensors in everything. And so right now, with an airplane tire, you replace it on a given schedule, right? After X number of touchdowns, that's when you replace it. But that tire might be only 10% used up based on the temperature of the touchdowns and the asphalt conditions and so on and so forth, or it might be 90% worn down. Imagine if you embedded sensors throughout that tire and you could have the airplane proactively tell you when to replace it. Well, that's what I think AI is going to do for all of us, for our spending, for our estate plan, for insurance, and so on and so forth. It'll be able to customize to your given situation what you should do based on what it knows about you.
Wow. Yeah, that's exciting. It is interesting to think about it in that my brother-in-law is a pilot, so I get to hear how amazing all their technology is and some of the things those planes can do. And I think, how are we in every other aspect of life seemingly behind that? Sounds like we're catching up.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because one thing I think is really important for clients to understand is you may have some clients that are not excited about technology, and you may have other clients on the other end that are wondering why I'll say our industry is so far behind. I'll put that in quotes, and the reality is that the regulation in this industry it's designed to protect clients. And in some cases it does that well. In some cases, maybe not so much, but that regulation really puts a strain on how quickly we can roll out new technologies. So if you as the advisor or you as the client watching this ever are wondering, why isn't Cedarwood using XYZ technology yet? It's because they're being really thoughtful about making sure that not only does it work really well, but it also meets the regulations.
A great point. And that's definitely where my rub is with AI is I am a very conscious individual when it comes to protection of data and making sure that the clients are safe and that employees are safe at the end of the day. And that was at first my biggest concern. It was, okay, how do we do this, but keep it safe and not end up with a huge mess on our hands? And I think companies like Commonwealth and the other big firms out there that are putting in the research to make sure it's compliant and safe, it really helps the rest of us feel more comfortable that we can move forward. And so it makes it easier for me because I can come to you and say, hey, here's some technology I want to push through with. And then you come back and say, well, here are the things I'm worried about.
Yeah, I think when we put it in investment terms, it also makes a lot more sense, right? You don't have probably any clients, let alone most of them, that want to put all of their money in a really risky investment, right? They want a diversified, well thought through, risk mitigated approach to growing. And that's what we do with technology as well.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. For you, I think this will be something you probably have a unique perspective on. When you look at independent firms and you look at wirehouse firms, more captive firms, what do you see the biggest difference in the technology between the two being?
There's a handful of differences that I think are important to call out. Number one is on the independent side, advisors have the choice to go wherever they want, whenever they want. They can leave one firm and go to another if that other firm is going to serve them better. And so there's a lot more responsiveness from the RIA or broker dealer that's serving the independent firm in terms of listening to feedback and taking those suggestions in and building the technology the way that the advisors want that technology to work. And since the advisors are the boots on the ground, they really know what the technology needs to do, what it needs to feel like and act like. And so I think from that standpoint, we end up with much friendlier technology for advisors and for clients. Another thing, and I don't want to throw any stones, but most of the wirehouses, one of the big ways that they make their money is by selling their proprietary products. And so the technologies are often designed to meet that goal. Like any company, like any capitalist company, there are gravitational pulls in the direction of wherever most of the revenue and profit are coming from. And so you have a situation where a lot of the technology at wirehouses are designed around selling those products and incentivizing those sales. And then the last thing on the flip side is the wirehouses tend to control up and down the food chain. They are the custodian in most cases. They are the product producer. And so there are some places where they have an advantage, where they can control up and down the technology ecosystem. They don't have to work with a third party company to make it work. And so in some places it can be less clunky. With that said, as we've talked about, as you know, Commonwealth recently entered into an agreement to be purchased by a company named LPL, who's the largest in our industry, serves the most number of advisors, and they are their own custodian. So I'm really excited to work with the LPL team. They've got a great technology stack, and we're going to help them make it even better. And so they have many of those same advantages without some of the drawbacks I mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I have the utmost confidence that you're going to indeed do that. So I think you covered the more controlled side. And then, where you live is somewhere in the middle. And then you have RIAs. And so I guess my question on that would be, in the RIA space, would you have concerns or fears of the amount of freedom that's allowed there? And what would the risks be associated with how free it is and what the options are?
Yeah, well said. So just to paint the picture, an advisor at Commonwealth has a pretty broad ability to use not just our technology, but outside technologies. But the limit there is they can only use technologies if they're an IAR or registered rep of ours. They can only use technologies that we have vetted and approved. Now, we want to vet and approve all of the industry's most powerful tools. And so we've got north of 100 different tools that an advisor can choose from and leverage. But they know by using one of those tools, they're using one that Commonwealth has spent literally months professionally vetting. We've done deep dives on their information security policies, on their financial stability, on all of their risk practices, the things that they do to mitigate risks, and that the calculations are correct, and on and on and on. And so Commonwealth spends literally millions of dollars a year doing that due diligence. An RIA who has the freedom to use any technology they see fit still have a regulatory obligation to do due diligence on those tools. But the reality is that they don't have the resources or the professional expertise to do the level of due diligence that we do. And so, most of the tools they're using are hopefully industry standard. I think as a client, I wouldn't be overly concerned. But yeah, I think the question remains, and it's a good question to ask independent RAs. What are your technology vetting practices so that I can be comfortable that my data is going to be safe with you?
Absolutely. And I think from an advisor perspective, if there's advisors who are considering what their next step will be, if they're coming from the more controlled space and they think, well, I want to go straight RIA, for us, in my mind, those are the challenges that I would be worried about. Again, maybe more on the conservative side of protection of our clients' information. And if you have that complete freedom, you have to have that complete confidence that you're going to be able to answer those questions without having an incredible resource like we have that has more people, more bandwidth to put energy into that. And so I agree. I think I would have concerns as an advisor, not even just as a client.
I think that's right. And I think one of the things within that that's really important to draw some depth into, to color in, is when it comes to, being at a wirehouse, being at an employee firm, there's a range of flexibilities, but fundamentally you are an employee of that firm and thus you're living by those policies and you have a manager that's enforcing it. On the far other end, like you said, if you're an independent RIA, it's Wild West. You choose everything and you bear the risk of all of those choices, both in terms of a breach and thus the brand impact, but also the regulatory risks of the SEC coming in and asking you what your vetting process was and not meeting SEC regulations. But I think the important thing is the world that exists in between those, the independent RIA and broker dealer space, is an incredibly broad world, right? Firms that look more like a wirehouse, but happen to be quote unquote independent in that you own your book of business. But fundamentally, when it comes to firm policies, they're very tight. And then you've got firms like Commonwealth that are as flexible as a firm can be. And part of the reason for that is we have an incredibly high, what we call lowest common denominator. We're incredibly careful about the advisors we bring on. All have a clean compliance record, all are doing right by their clients, all care deeply and have long-term relationships with their clients. And so as a result of that, we don't have to create compliance policies that go to some very lowest common denominator. We can make common sense policies and create a lot of flexibility for our advisors. So I agree with you. I think if you are in a captive space and you're looking at your options, don't just think independent versus RIA. Think about the whole spectrum of where you want to be.
Yeah, thanks for illuminating that. I do think that is a huge challenge for people to understand that come from the captive space. That's something we had to learn, throughout the last few years, is that it's not black and white. It's not one side versus the other. There's a lot of different shades in the in between. And so I'm glad that you highlighted that. And I will say we loved that Commonwealth took that approach of we want high quality so we can be a little bit more free and open. And that's really what we've tried to replicate as well with our firm is we only want to bring on the best of the best so that we don't have to tighten things up. We want as much freedom as possible, not only in technology, but in every aspect of the business. We truly want you to be independent and free, which I think Commonwealth has done a great job saying, look, we want to have our hands off as much as possible, but there's going to always be some level of limits just for your own protection.
Absolutely.
I guess my next question would be, we talked about AI, but other than that, you've seen, I guess I'd love to know, what do you think has been the greatest impact of technology since 1999 when you started with Commonwealth? And then forward looking over the next 20 years, other than just AI, what do you see as the opportunities with technology?
Yeah. Great question. So I think one of the costs in any industry, and I don't just mean financial costs, but I mean costs to the services working the way that you would want them to work, is in the game of telephone, right? That the client has some request. They need to translate, call, email, whatever, communicate that request to the office. Sometimes that happens to an admin or secretary. Sometimes that goes straight to an advisor. The advisor then may want the admin to carry through that request, right? You've got a lot of hands in the mix. And so I think one of the things that's been most powerful and will continue to be powerful is a client doesn't want to change their own address online unless it's much, much easier to do that than the alternative. And so I'm sure many of you have seen or used, whether it's on UPS.com or some other place where you start typing in an address and it auto fills the whole address. You don't have to like do street, number street, then city, then zip, blah, blah, blah. Well, the easier that we can make it, the more likely it is that the client will just carry that out themselves. And on one hand, that can feel to an advisor like, well, what's my value add if the client isn't relying on me for those things? And the absolute answer is the client relies on you for your wisdom and your judgment and your counsel, right? And so the more that we can have the client able to do themselves, or the more that it can take a team member or an advisor 10 seconds rather than 10 minutes or 10 hours to do something like a rebalance of a whole book of business, right? The better it gets. And so I think the magic of technology at large has been what we call straight through processing, where whoever is taking the action, they take that single action and it carries straight through. And I think that when you marry that concept with not just AI, but big data and a number of other technologies, you get to a place where it becomes safer and safer and safer. So right now, it takes 4 days to a week to have a new bank line set up, right? At LPL, they've gotten it so that it's same day. And part of the way that they've done that is technology, but part of it is through data that they can analyze the situation and predict that this is the bank account of this person, and thus it's safe to set up, and we're not going to have regrets later on of money being moved to the wrong place. And so I think when you take data and AI and straight through processing and you marry it all together, you're entering a world where all of a sudden the stuff that was drudgery becomes a lot easier, and we can focus our attention, like I said before, on the soulful things that really do improve quality of life and quality of service.
Yeah, that's a great response. That's interesting. I think about baseball as an example and the impact that statistics has played in baseball. For years, it was the same. And then all of a sudden, now we're seeing a completely different level of defense. And in a lot of ways, to me, it ties into what you're saying, in that it's mass numbers. And now we have the statistics to be able to evaluate it and make some changes.
Well, and to pick up on that, we also have human judgment calls to make on where we want the technology to play and where we don't, right? Like, as we know, that strike zone analysis, it's pretty perfect. And so do we want to change the game in the way that we no longer have umps call balls and strikes? That umps are still there for the human interactions, but when it comes to the cut and dry quantitative stuff, do we turn that over to the technology? And it's fun for me to think about not just the ethics of that, but all of the, how does it change the enjoyment of the game? And I think that's something we'll wrestle with on technology for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think an interesting, I'd be curious to get your perspective on this, but I feel like everyone says millennials and anyone younger than that want to do it themselves and want to use technology and they don't need the touch. What is your perspective on that?
The data absolutely does not suggest that. What the data suggests is that they don't want a clunky experience, right? So when it comes to stuff that a touch doesn't help with, yeah, they don't want to touch. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of buying some small dollar item on Amazon and then you go to return it and it actually says, don't even bother returning it. And all you've done is you've worked with an app, and that app had an algorithm that it was going to cost Amazon more to provide free shipping back than it would be for you to just keep that item. And so that's a place where a touch would have been annoying. I would have had to wait in a queue, wait to talk to somebody. I would have had to, package this thing up. Amazon has used technology to make that a frictionless experience. But on the flip side, I'm looking for a new pocket knife. And I got to say, shopping on Amazon for a pocket knife is completely unsatisfying because I don't know what it feels like to open that blade. I don't know how long it's going to last. Da 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 da. I'd rather go into a shop with some experts who can talk me through what they like and don't like about that knife. And so I think that there's millennials are in the same boat that Gen Xers are and that baby boomers are, is that make my life easier, but please, on the important decisions, let me talk to someone that I trust.
I can agree more. And I'll say from the audience that I spend time with, it's exactly the same thing. I would say that we have gotten used to the efficiencies that technology can bring to us. And so we are a little spoiled there, and that we don't want the extra click. We don't want, we liked pre-fill, right? That sounds great. But ironically, I go into Best Buy to buy technology because it's an intimidating thing to me. And I want someone who really knows it to say, what do you want? What are you looking for exactly? Okay, this fits for you. Because just like technology, finances aren't one color. It is truly a painted picture that's different for everyone. It's not that, okay, you're an X bracket of dollars. Here's the answer for you with this time horizon. Your emotions are different than the guy who's sitting next door to you. So I think that you're spot on there, and I couldn't agree more.
Well, and to double click on that Best Buy example, the role of the person, in my view, is also a role of helping us live out our best self and not succumb to the understandable sort of human foibles, right? So they did this study I think it was at Best Buy. It was at one of the big electronic stores. And this was back in the days of DVDs. And they looked at all the people that bought a DVD player but returned it. And they asked them, why'd you return this DVD player? And people invariably, the most common answer was, it was too complicated. I couldn't figure out how to use it. And then they asked them, well, what led you to buy this particular model? And they said, well, it was the one that had the most features. And then they looked at those same people who then bought another one. And the most common answer of why they chose that next one was it had the next most features, right? Rather than this is something that fits my life and allows me to do what I want to do with my life. And I think the role of the human being, the advisor, in all cases at Best Buy and in the financial advisor's office is, what do you value? And how can we make a plan that works with those values? And the technology is just there to help me do that as best I can, as efficiently as I can.
That's such a good analogy. And I feel like we see that in our industry a lot. And people say, advisors saying, I want to go and I want to control everything. Right? I want it to be my brand. I want to handle the marketing. I want to be able to speak to my clients the way I speak to them. And then what they don't realize is all those extra features that you mentioned take a lot of extra work. And so they then get into that situation where they say, shoot, now I'm here and I have payroll to figure out. I have benefits to figure out. I have to do the marketing now myself. I don't have any support there. If they're RA, they're figuring out their compliance, the research, everything else. And they end up realizing, okay, well, maybe I went too far. So then maybe they go to the second feature and it takes them a few times before they end up in the right spot. But I think that's probably a common thing with that within humanity.
I think that's said so well that a lot of advisors I talk with, whether it's about technology or choosing a partner, they optimize, like you said, for control. When in reality, if they peel back the onion one or two more layers, the things they care about is, I want my clients to be deeply served. I want my life to be efficient and feel good so that I can spend time on the things that I want to spend time on, whether that's coaching my kids' baseball game or whether that's growing my practice or whatever else. And I want it to be profitable for me. And when you go to solve for those three things, the client experience, the advisor experience, and growth and profitability, almost invariably controlling every last aspect of it doesn't solve for any of those three things, because you have to do it all from scratch. It takes a ton of time, takes ongoing maintenance. And so going to a place where you have enough flexibility that you can serve your clients the way that you want, that you can enjoy the lifestyle that you want, and that you can grow at whatever pace you want to grow at. That for me is the thing for an advisor to focus on.
Absolutely. I think you've touched on that premise a few times now. And to me, our core value there is fulfillment. And so our goal is to free up our partners to do whatever it is that they enjoy. And then whatever the things that they don't enjoy, we figure out, okay, then how do we pick up that lift? Whether we're actually doing it or whether you need to build out your team and make some changes and tweaks, some of those things are worth paying for. And I think partners like Commonwealth and LPL and Cedarwood can really bring some light on those. We've walked through it a little bit, and let's find out what helps you live a life that you enjoy living.
That's 100%. Not to pander, but if I was an advisor at a captive wirehouse environment, I would be looking for a firm like Cedarwood that provided me the resourcing and support that I needed, but also the flexibility to, provide my clients the service that they really deserve, but not have to do it all myself.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I mean, obviously, we do a lot of pick and upload, and we've learned a lot over the last few years, but I just can't imagine going from being completely captive to completely free without an intermediate space and learning time.
Well, and I think on top of that, oftentimes we look to the past for what the experience is going to be like. when we should be looking towards the future. And that's hard because the future is unknown. But my best guess, and I think everyone would probably concur, is that the future is going to contain the future of technology at the very least, and maybe regulation is going to contain more pendulum swings, more uncertainty, and more acceleration. And so to have some resourcing on your team that you can turn to, I think it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, that's some great insights. I've never thought about that specifically, but what we've been seeing lately, if that ends up being true in the future, we can count on that.
For sure.
Well, wonderful. Well, I appreciate you being so gracious with your time today, Cole. Our listeners are going to get so much value from this. I've gotten a lot from it. And as we move forward and continue to learn what technology can do for us, I'm just glad to have you as a partner.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thanks for such thoughtful questions that you created, and I appreciate the time to be here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for visiting with us, for all the listeners out there. And we look forward to having you again on Beyond the Trees.